Now that we finished the podcast, I feel like we need to do the intro because it went into a little bit of different direction than what we anticipated.
Welcome to a very special episode of the podcast in which we have Nick, who is a lawyer, on, and we are going to talk about possible real-life legal implications of things that happened in Bloodborne.
Say hi, Nick.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to me babble on about nonsense.
Yeah, and like I said, we finished recording this episode, and it's actually really cool.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I'm glad it made sense.
We learned a lot.
Yeah, we did. And Nick, after watching this, how qualified do you think people will be to practice real law?
Oh, just as qualified as most lawyers.
Okay.
Hi, Richie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, boss.
Richie, tell us what we're doing today.
Today, we are going to discuss the fishing hamlet with Nick, but we're specifically going to discuss what legal actions could be taken against Bergenworth and the hunters as a result of the fishing hamlet massacre, because Nick is a lawyer.
Yay! I think that's the most concise entry you've ever done.
Thank you.
That was good.
It's like we've recorded this 3 times already.
We had practice runs.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay. Back when I was actually practicing, whenever I gave oral arguments, like in federal court, I would always practice over and over again. So this is cool.
Yeah, we're basically lawyers as well now.
But as Eileen says, that has no honor with it.
Oh, burn. Okay. So, Richie, tell us, because you've had a lot of practice. Tell us what happened in the fishing hamlet.
What happened in the fishing hamlet is that after Willem and the other members of Bergenworth had been looking at what they found in the Chalice dungeons, they realized that the key to evolving into a higher form of life wasn't just messing around with blood, it was that your consciousness had to function in a certain way. So he became very obsessed with figuring out, firstly, what was different about the brains, like the structure of the brain of people who were communing with the Great Ones, and also how he could commune with the Great Ones. So, through some completely unspecified means, we're not sure what exactly happened, he found out that there was this fishing village, and the people there were kind of half human, half fish things. And they worshipped and communed with a great one in the ocean called Kos. So he became fixated on, okay, we have to figure out what is up with these people. So this is where it gets confusing again, because we're told that Bergenworth are responsible for what happened, but from what we can gather, it was the hunters. So we don't know if it was Bergenworth sent the hunters as a proxy thing, or if the Bergenworth were with the hunters as like bodyguards, or Bergenworth kind of like joined in or something like that. We don't know exactly what happened, but they went to the hamlet, they got the fish people to beckon Kos to the surface, they killed Kos, they grabbed Kos's child out of her womb, and they massacred the people in the hamlet and started performing autopsies on them to figure out what it was about their brains that was different. So that's the story of the fishing hamlet.
Okay. So, Nick.
Indeed.
So the hunters went into a fishing hamlet, and they massacred a bunch of people, made holes in their brains. What else, Richie?
They cracked their skulls open to like search the brains for extra eyes. They gutted and removed a child from Kos, and the child died. Yeah.
Is that legal?
Assuming there's any kind of governing law, the answer would be no. To kind of address that, I'm for purposes of this discussion, I'm consuming that we're going by American tort and criminal law and international law,
Of course,
as it exists.
Yes.
Because in the world of Bloodborne, the law seems to be more or less these days what the Healing Church says it is, at least in the Yharnam area. So I'm just going to assume that American tort and criminal law and international law of like genocide and stuff are going to apply to this. That's actually a pretty somber way to go. In real life, that's probably what would apply. This would be treated as like a human rights crime of genocide. In a nutshell, but we can go into more detail, obviously, because the private law side of American tort law and criminal law is much more fun to talk about. So,
okay, let's do that.
There are quite a few crimes and torts that this might fall under, and I'll just give a bit of context because I didn't know what a tort was until I went to law school. You'd hear people talk about tort reform, this and that, and I'm like, well, what's a tort? And not until my first day of tort class did I finally understand what a tort was.
Is it like a really fancy tart?
Yeah, I was thinking it sounds like a dessert.
Yeah.
It's a particularly delicious dessert with notes of hazelnut and with what's that hazelnut stuff that they sell in Germany all the time? Nutella. I love Nutella, but anyway, they sell it here too.
They sell it everywhere.
Well, they do. The reason I said Germany, I don't know, it's really popular in the United States too, but I said Germany because one of my law school friends got detained at an airport in Germany, I think, because something having to do with Nutella. They must have thought it was something else. So he got detained. I don't know. So that's why Germany came to mind, because he was on his way to like this big international arbitration moot court competition and got detained, I think, for something having to do with Nutella.
Did he talk his way out of it?
He did, because he wound up going to the competition and coming back unscathed, so he somehow got out of it.
Nice.
His legal training served him well. For once. I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, so what a tort is basically is it's much like a crime. It requires an act, culpability, and a result, except that instead of the government prosecuting you for it, somebody can sue you for it. Classic tort is like a car accident. You're not paying attention. You hit a pedestrian at a crosswalk, you get sued.
Right.
But there are others, obviously. But so the massacre at the fishing hamlet falls under all sorts of things. Probably the most obvious one, assuming there were someone left alive to sue, like maybe some child of the fishing hamlet might have escaped the massacre and grown up and hired a lawyer. Probably the most obvious cause of action would be a wrongful death suit. Basically, what that is someone dies because of a tort, either a negligent or an intentional tort. And to kind of back up, because I have experience explaining this stuff to law students, but it's kind of convoluted. In essence,
it's okay, Nick. We're lore hunters.
That's right. It's like when I say tort and when I say mental states, I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit. Most of the time, to commit a tort and be successfully sued for it, you need to do something to cause a result with a certain mental state, and that's another term for culpability. It's like how blameworthy your conduct is. And in tort, there's negligence, there's recklessness, and there's intent, and each of those gets progressively worse and more blameworthy. Like negligence is simple carelessness. I mean, I could talk about that for hours with law students, but this discussion, we'll say negligence is simple carelessness, like, classic.
Yeah, but in this
accident.
case, it wouldn't even apply to the fishing hamlets because it wasn't an accident.
Right. No, this was deliberate, clearly. And then recklessness is worse than that, but not quite as bad as intent. It's like let's say there's a serious risk that somebody's going to get hurt because of what you're doing, and you just disregard it. Like a classic example is like drag racing on the highway. You don't mean to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily know that somebody's going to get hurt, but there's a really good chance somebody's going to get hurt, and you do it anyway. So that's recklessness. And then intent is either knowledge or purpose. So you either know somebody's going to get hurt to like a 99.9% degree of certainty, or you intend to hurt somebody. And either one of those will qualify as intent for tort purpose. And so clearly, what the Bergenworth scholars and hunters did here was intentional. Even by this convoluted legal definition that I've tried to put forth. So that's basically a tort. You do something with the right culpability and cause a particular result most of the time. And so in a wrongful death suit, if you've either intentionally or negligently killed someone, their estate can sue you, not on their behalf, but on behalf of the people who stood to benefit from your continued life. Like, say, some poor child, his parents are massacred in the fishing hamlet. He somehow escapes. He gets a lawyer. And so he he stood to benefit from his parents' guidance and mentorship and provision for his physical needs and so forth. So he would sue to recover his own losses from their death.
Well, that kind of is what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the orphan of cause.
Well, yeah, exactly the orphan, assuming it weren't dead, which it's sort of in this weird undead state, I guess.
Well, I think that it sort of bypassed the formal legal system and just cursed.
Pretty much. Which is much more practical and expedient thing.
Well, hang on. This raises another question of, like, a lot of the people in Yharnam are cursed because of what Bergenworth and the Hunters did, but they themselves weren't culpable for the hamlet. So could the citizens of Yharnam actually sue the hamlet?
Well, yeah, they could, and
yeah,
to kind of cut through a lot of legal convolution. If Bergenworth had a reason, if Bergenworth could have reasonably foreseen that the people of Yharnam would have been cursed, then there's a good chance the people of Yharnam would win.
Oh.
Because a lot of tort and criminal law comes down to whether you could foresee that your actions would produce this result. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So then the fishing hamlet could sue Bergenworth, and the Yharnam people could sue Bergenworth.
Yeah, and of course that's at this point we're getting into large sums of liability because you got the whole city of Yharnam.
Yeah. Well, what can Bergenworth do at this point then? Because they're all either piles of slime or flies.
Well, I guess assuming Willem is still coherent sitting by the lake, maybe he would have to. Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of assumes Bergenworth is still a functional institution that exists and can be sued in some capacity.
Oh, it's pretty functional.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why they have the password gate and everything? Because they just don't want to be served.
That's it. That must be it. Because a process server comes to the gate and says, "Hey, I'm here to serve a complaint." But I don't know the password. Then he starts mumbling, whatever he mumbles after he says the password. But yeah, that's exactly why. Because, well, gosh, the rules on service of process I could also talk about all day, but no one will want to listen.
So, okay, let me ask you. So then the hunters themselves were the ones that killed the fish people. But
that's right.
If the scholars of Bergenworth were not there, is Bergenworth still responsible, or are the hunters also responsible?
The answer to both questions is yes. On one of two grounds. It's either what lawyers call vicarious liability or direct liability. And those get a little bit convoluted, but let's say, imagine you own a fleet of delivery trucks, and you hire full-time drivers to operate the trucks. One driver is negligent, hits somebody at an intersection. The injured person can successfully sue both the driver and the employer, even though the employer had nothing directly to do with the accident, because of your employment relationship with the driver, you're subject to liability for injuries that kind of arise out of your enterprise, even if you didn't directly have anything to do with it.
I see.
But if you let's say you tell the driver to go do something that's wrong, then you're directly responsible as if you've done it.
And the driver is also responsible.
Exactly.
Okay.
So vicarious means you didn't do anything. It's just you have a relationship with someone who did, and therefore you're liable, like an employer. Or direct liability means you somehow participated in it. And I think clearly Bergenworth sort of instigated this whole thing or somehow participated in it. So I think they're liable right along with the hunter.
Well, the priest in the hamlet is specifically cursing Bergenworth. Yep. He doesn't mention the hunters.
Blasphemous murderers, blood-crazed fiends.
Yep.
Yeah. Very articulate curse.
Is he practicing his testimony?
It sounds like he might be. He says it over and over, right?
Yeah.
Like he's rehearsing for one of these days when I serve him with the subpoena to come testify against Bergenworth. He'll know exactly what to say. Of course, the bit about bottomless curse seems improvised. Bottomless curse, bottomless sea. But nevertheless, it was well delivered, I think. So Bergenworth's responsible if either the hunters were working for them and they kind of knew what was going on, or if they sanctioned it. And I think it's pretty clear to me they sanctioned it. So they're responsible. And if they were actually put on trial for war crimes, it'd be the same thing. If you order it to be done, it's just as if... Well, actually, this wouldn't be a war crime. It'd be genocide, but that's a lot of fine distinction, I guess, that we can maybe save for a little bit later on in the podcast, because we're still talking about crimes and torts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Wrongful death, you're kind of suing on your own behalf because you lost something because the person died. Like parents suing because the children were murdered. And this actually brings an interesting kind of real life example to mind. I don't know how much attention you guys paid to the O.J. Simpson case when it was big here in America. O.J. Simpson, former football star, he's put on trial for murdering his ex-wife and boyfriend. He gets acquitted for the murder, but then the family sues him for wrongful death and prevails. And a lot of people are like, well, how can that be? He was acquitted of the murder, but then he's found liable for their deaths in a civil suit, right?
Yeah.
And the difference is what lawyers call the standard of proof. It's like how strong a showing you have to make, right? How convincing the evidence has to be. It's like for a crime, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is very high. You have to show a very high likelihood that the person committed the crime. It's not absolute. It's not 100%. But it's more in the realm of like, some people say 85, some people say 95. We'll just take the mean and say it's like a 90% likelihood. But in a civil suit, you only have to show a 51% likelihood, more likely than not. It's called a preponderance of the evidence. So, even if the California prosecutors couldn't show that it was like a 90% likelihood that he killed them for a conviction, the family was evidently able to show a 51% likelihood, which means he was liable in civil terms, even though he wasn't criminally liable for it. So that's the reason why OJ could be found civilly but not criminally liable. And it'd kind of be the same here. If it's a civil suit, you only have to show more likely than not that Bergenworth had something to do with it. But if you're trying to convict him, it's more like 90%.
What if the fishing hamlet takes Bergenworth to Judge Judy? What is the burden of proof there?
Judge Judy's whims, whether she's had coffee. And if she's short on sleep, she hasn't had snacks or coffee, look out. I love Judge Judy.
Yeah, me too. I used to watch her all the time.
Oh yeah, law doesn't. Like if you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Charlie says bird law is not governed by reason. Judge Judy is governed by reason, but not law. I guess we'll say that.
Richie, do you know who Judge Judy is?
Yes, Judge Judy used to be on when I was in high school.
Did you watch it?
And I did not realize it was. I did because it was on it's on in the afternoons during school holidays. And I didn't realize it was still going.
Is it still going to this day?
Because I associate it with the late 90s.
Well, it was on then, but she's still on TV. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she's still going, man. She used to be like a family court judge in New York. Like she would order deadbeat dads to pay child support and stuff like that. And then she got her TV show, and of course that's much more lucrative than being an actual judge. So she went to do that instead. But she actually was a real judge.
Must be less stressful as well.
I'm sure it's much more fun. It's like when you're a real judge, I clerked for a United States bankruptcy judge, and so a lot of times whatever decision she made would be what I recommended, and so there's a real weight of responsibility that comes with knowing that real people's well-being depends on what you decide,
Mm-hmm.
But in the TV show, it's like, okay, you're getting flown out to California, and whatever damages she awards the show is probably going to pay anyway, so nothing's at stake,
Yeah. What would it be called? You know how you have like the people versus whatever?
Well, in a civil suit, what would probably happen is the survivors of the fishing hamlet would come together in a class action against Bergenworth, most likely. And class actions are actually kind of tough to maintain because you have to show a lot of different specific things for the judge to authorize a class action. But basically, if one defendant has done more or less the same wrong thing to a bunch of different people, it's deemed more efficient if they all come together and sue as one, instead of having a bunch of different trials covering basically the same fact. Because then you have a risk that different juries will find inconsistently, and so you could have Bergenworth getting off in front of one jury and getting held liable in front of another, and we don't want that. So it's just everybody comes together and sues in a class act, which means there'll be one named plaintiff, ex-child of the fishing hamlet, to represent everybody else. And the lawyers will make out like bandits, and the people of the fishing hamlet will get like a box of cereal or something.
Do you think the child of the fishing hamlet in this case is the orphan of cause?
I mean, why not? At this point.
Yeah. That's the impression I get, is because that seems to be the source of the curse. And when you get rid of the orphan, it's like, well, that's that. Then.
Yeah, it's all good now. Yeah, no, so it'd be like a Orphan of Kos v. Bergenworth.
Okay.
And the Hunters et al., which et al. Is kind of a Latin abbreviation for basically and everybody else.
Cool. So specifically, which hunters would have been involved in this massacre, Richie?
Well, we know it was German because he is tormented by the orphan.
Right.
Probably Maria because she throws away her rakuyo in the well there, and she seems to have left a little flower for Kos.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know who else.
Maybe, I guess, Ludwig because he's there in the nightmare. I don't know. Maybe he.
Oh, I don't know, because I the way they explain Ludwig is that he's recruited like after German.
Yeah.
No, he's not.
So I think Ludwig.
I'm a Ludwig professional.
Mm-hmm.
He's not recruited after German.
Okay.
He opens his own workshop after German, but it doesn't mean he's not recruited before.
Yeah, but we don't know though. Like
it could be anything. No, you said he's recruited after German, which is not true.
Yeah.
Well, he was like the first church hunter, right? And that came after German's workshop.
Yeah, but he could have still been.
He could have been recruited like officially by the church afterward, but he might have been at the hamlet.
Yeah.
Like he might have hunted like under Gehrman's tutelage before that, maybe.
Yeah.
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 Because Gehrman was the first hunter, period. So I guess that would kind of make sense.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have put Ludwig in charge of the church hunters if he didn't already know something about hunting, which he would have to learn from Gehrman.
There we go. Oh, look. Nick is team sin completely.
Oh, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't...
No, Nick. You can't take that back.
Oh, sorry, Richard. I was just thinking out loud.
That's okay.
Whenever I think out loud, bad things happen. But yeah. And then another thing that's a lot of people confuse with wrongful death is called a survival action. Like historically, as a matter of United States common law, if you died, your lawsuit died with you. But most states have, and probably, I'd say Canada and Australia have something like this too. It's called a survival action, in which your estate can sue. They can institute not only a wrongful death suit on behalf of the people who survive you, but also a survival action in your place, as if they were you, to recover on your behalf for the benefit of your estate. So there'd be a survival action on behalf of all the dead villagers to recover, in their right for the pain and suffering that they endured before death. And I imagine it was pretty horrific. You're getting butchered and your head's getting cut open and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So the damages would run pretty high in a survival action, as opposed to wrongful death. A lot of even law students get these two confused, but wrongful death is on behalf of the survivors, whereas a survival action is on behalf of the person who didn't survive. So it's kind of ironically named. It's like, why do you drive on a parkway and park on a driveway kind of thing? But yeah, so basically it's a wrongful death and a survival action, and there'd be two types of damages: compensatory and punitive. I'm sure you're all familiar with punitive damages because of all the sensational stories of,
yeah,
7-8 figure punitive damage awards from, tiny injuries. And the distinction between the two is, for compensatory damages, you have to, for every dollar you recover, you have to link it to some specific type of harm. Classic is medical bills and stuff like that, but there's also like emotional pain, which is of course harder to quantify. But you have to show that some suffering to justify the award. But punitive damages are awarded to punish people for especially culpable conduct. Like basically if you acted with intent, right, that we were talking about earlier. That justifies punitive damages because that's especially blameworthy. It's not connected to harm, it's just to punish somebody. And you might as well give the fruits of the punishment to the victim, because who else, right? It's either the government or the victim. May as well give it to the victim.
Right.
And and because the general rule in the U.S. is that the winner doesn't get attorney's fees, punitive damages are kind of like a backdoor way to give the plaintiff her lawyer's bills if she wins. That's the function.
Right.
So, and there's almost no limit to how large the punitive damage award can be. There are some limits on it. Like the Supreme Court has articulated as a matter of constitutional law, but those are, in most cases, those don't even come into play. So it could be pretty large. And in this case, because a village full of people was massacred for really no good reason, I think you're looking at some pretty hefty damages on the punitive side, not to mention the compensatory side. But yeah, no. So I would love to represent the hamlet in this case because I'd make out like a bandit.
Do you think the hamlet would have a good chance of winning?
Oh, yeah, I think, yeah. You could point to the existence of the nightmare. You could have testimony from, testimony from the orphan. If Kasa's spirit is somehow out there in the cosmos, you could have testimony from her.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who might have survived the massacre at the hamlet.
Okay, but let's say, you were a real scumbag, though, and you wanted to defend Bergenworth.
Yep.
What kind of arguments would you attempt to make?
Dear, that's tough. For one, if I was representing Bergenworth specifically, I would try to put distance between Bergenworth and the hunt who directly perpetrated it. If I could show that, that no scholar from Bergenworth was there, and the hunter said, well, they told us to do it, I would do it. Everything to kind of try to show that, there's no connection between Bergenworth and the hunt.
Yeah.
Because
there's probably not a paper trail or something
exactly
that they could follow.
And if I were a real scumbag, I'd say, Willem, if these papers somehow got lost, I think it would be really fortuitous and beneficial. That's totally unethical, and I could get disbarred and maybe convicted for that. But if I were Saul Goodman type lawyer, really unethical.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. I'd be like, Willem, there's all these papers that connect us to the hunters. I'm thinking that would really help us if those couldn't be found. Oh, I gotcha. And he doesn't have, he's blind, but he'd never wink at me. I gotcha. Wink at me from underneath that thing that covers his eyes.
Yeah.
So I would be like, let's get rid of this paper. So that would basically be the only way to get them out of it, would be to put distance between them and the people who directly perpetrated it. Because if it really had nothing to do with it, they can't be held liable. And then it would fall on the hunters if my defense were to succeed.
And let's say you were to represent the hunters.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, that's tough because they're the ones who directly perpetrated it. I would just kind of hope that everyone was massacred and whoever was left couldn't testify. You couldn't summon the orphans.
Oh my god.
Okay, but how does blood drunkenness factor into intent?
Well, yeah, that would be really the only credible defense.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Richie, that's what I would do.
I think you're right. Assuming that it's proven beyond doubt that the hunters were the ones who actually perpetrated it. The only way to kind of escape. Well, you see, that's the thing. In a civil suit, that doesn't really help to show that you were crazy or
right.
As long as you were capable of forming a thought, you can be held liable in tort. So it wouldn't there's a case that every law student studies, and the facts are something like this. This guy believes that this guy assaults someone, right? Or actually commits battery against someone, sneaks up on someone and beats him up because he believes that they're like Darth Vader trying to kill him or something.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And of course, when they're sued, they try to say that, I was crazy. I wasn't responsible for my actions. And the judge is like, no, you were capable of forming a thought. You formed the intent to beat this person up. That's all that matters. But as a matter of criminal law, though, that's a little bit different. If they were really blood drunk and couldn't sort of appreciate that what they were doing was wrong, then that might offer a defense based upon a mental disease or defect, And there are all sorts of different rules in the United States about how to establish that. But if, basically they couldn't appreciate that what they were doing was wrong, then that might get them off of a criminal charge, maybe.
I was just thinking also about, let's say, the Healing Church, right? If they intentionally infect you with blood that turns you into a beast, but that only happens because you're not sufficiently enlightened. Who is really to blame in that? That's really more your fault, I think.
Well, it's in real life, if you're dispensing a medicine and you know that there's a 50% chance it's going to kill somebody, then you can be held liable for that, even if the reason for the death is sort of intrinsic to the person, If your medicine only kills stupid people, you're still liable if you know that half the population is stupid, yet you're dispensing this drug anyway.
So even though it will only kill Richie. Oh.
Because this is the third attempt to record, we should point out that Sin slept for 2 hours last night. So she's in an extremely bad mood.
Just a little bit. Her cat kept her awake.
Yeah. It's okay, I'm drinking my first cup of coffee. Things are looking up for you, Richie.
I'm actually surprised that I'm not babbling incoherently because I've only had one coffee, and usually I'm at 2 by now, at least.
Well, this comes natural to you, Nick.
Well, awesome. Knocking it out of the park. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know what?
What's up?
Well, since Richie went a little off topic and talked about the healing church and poison, what about the situation in Castle Cainhurst?
Oh, well, to me, clearly that's genocide.
And I guess it would be, wait a minute. In this case, it would be a similar thing, but instead of the Bergenworth hunters and Bergenworth, it would be the executioners and the healing church.
Right, yeah. I know there are those on our Discord who side with the executioners. I just don't see how that's morally defensible. I think it's basically the same. Whatever I said about the village hamlet and Bergenworth probably applies with equal force, if not greater force, to the Vile Bloods and the executioners.
What about Annalise, though? Because she can't die.
She can't die, but she can be hurt. Like, for example, when Alfred comes and pounds her to mud, assuming because I think once you take her to the altar of despair, like time reverses, so she may not even remember what happened. But assuming that the queenly flesh could talk, you could put that blob of flesh on the stand, and she could testify that this fool with a golden pyramid on his head came and pounded me into mush, and when he spoke, it sounded like a doting fanboy, so I know it was Alfred.
And you know how Ligarius? He kind of just keeps her prisoner. What can he also be charged with for that?
Oh, yes, I brushed up on this. Well, as a matter of law, criminal law would be kidnapping. Basically, when you treat a person like a movable object and just move them around and hold them against the will, that's kidnapping. Second only to murder in terms of private law offenses as far as how severe it is.
Oh, wow.
Kidnapping, at least in the U.S., kidnapping is a very serious offense. Some states have imposed the death penalty for it, at least at certain points in our history, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, in terms of tort law, it's called false imprisonment. There are a lot of funny examples I use to teach law students false imprisonment, but the essence of it is, if you confine somebody to a bounded area, which means their freedom of movement is limited in all directions for some appreciable length of time, and get this is how lawyers conceptualize things. They're either aware of the confinement or harmed by it, not both. You either know you're being confined or you're harmed by it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny that the pretzel flips that professors do to try to test the was harmed by it but didn't know about it aspect of it. But usually you know about it when you're confined. Like, it doesn't have to be physical barriers. It could be like moral pressure to remain in one, not moral pressure, but like societal pressure to remain in one place. Like, classic example that I'd like to use is, let's say you're showering at the gym, right? You're naked, you're showering. And let's say, I don't know, somebody comes and, let's say Richard comes and steals your clothes out of your locker, right?
You fucking bully.
Well, in that case, you could leave the shower area and go into the rest of the gym, but you'd be naked, so you'd be humiliated, right? So as a practical matter, you can't leave the locker room. So that's false imprisonment, too. It's like you've been effectively confined to that area.
So a prank could get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it could.
Huh.
I think a lot of the things people do to each other as pranks are actionable as torts, and people just don't realize it, or they just let it pass because it was a prank.
Oh, wow.
Let's say you lock your friend in a garage as a prank. Well, that's false imprisonment. You could be sued for that.
So when I tell Richard, you better be in your chair recording by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I swear to God, that could be false imprisonment because I'm like imprisoning him in that chair.
Well, if you threaten somebody with physical harm and they capitulate and remain in the area, that could be false imprisonment. Yeah.
Oh, damn. Let's hope Richard doesn't know how to reach a lawyer.
Or it's like if like Richard holds a gun to Corvo's head, saying, "You leave this room, I'm going to shoot Corvo."
Oh my God!
That could be by some means, you confine somebody to a limited area of your choosing against their will. That's false imprisonment. And so, since he's held her there for Lord knows how long, hundreds of years, however long it's been, that's clearly egregious case of false imprisonment to me.
Yeah.
Very, very long indeed.
What about, okay, here's one that we haven't talked about in another, like, healing church fucks everything up situation. That would be old Yharnam.
Oh, dear.
Oh, God.
Because it's very heavily implied that the healing church deliberately infected old Yharnam, but they never come out and say it.
Right.
So, like, say we got, like, Vardy or someone to make a video about how the church infected old Yharnam. How much evidence would he have to put in there to make it convincing?
Ah, dear. Enough to show that it's more likely than not that they did. Because remember in a tort suit, it's a much more lenient standard of proof than in a criminal case. So all you have to show is that a 51% chance that the Healing Church did that, and they could be held liable for it. Even if there's not enough to convict them of a crime, you can still prevail in a civil suit. So.
Oh, Yeah, go on.
Oh no, yeah. So it's just the 51%. That's the magic number in tort.
So I have a question about something that is now seemingly complicated. So Lawrence and Gurman summon the moon presence. And then the moon presence traps Gurman in the dream until Lawrence gets her a baby.
Right. Which apparently will never happen because Lawrence turned into the bloodletting beast and we killed him.
Yeah. So who can sue who here?
I see. That's well, the supernatural aspect make it a little complicated.
Yeah.
And also, they do seem to have drawn up a formal contract in which Gurman is collateral.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in real life, a human being can't be collateral or movable, treated like movable property. But let's assume they can. Just for the sake of discussion, we'll assume that that's permissible. Yeah. I mean, if false imprisonment's not a tort, or kidnapping's not a crime if it's consensual. But there comes a point, what reasonable people would understand the scope of the consent to be, even on a contractual basis. Like if Gehrman's been trapped in the dream so long that nobody could have anticipated it, then at some point the consent would effectively expire, and the moon presence might be liable for false. Assuming you could sue effectively a deity, the moon presence would be liable for false imprisonment.
Okay.
There is a movie called The Man Who Sued God, which I assume is maybe based on a true story.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean...
Hang on, let's see how did that play
I mean, good luck, good luck collecting. Yeah, that did happen, I'm pretty sure. I mean, it was a fool's errand, obviously, but I guess the guy was just trying to make a point, whatever the point was.
Okay, so Lawrence is supposed to bring the moon presence a baby, but he never does. Can the moon presence sue someone in that case?
Well, if anything, it'd probably be for breach of contract, I would think. Like, you promised me a baby. Now, it may not have been time-bound. They may not have set a specific time limit on it. But when the parties to a contract don't specify a deadline, a lot of times courts will interpret the contract to specify a reasonable time. Mm-hmm. And, whatever a reasonable time is, that's just for the court to decide. And then, so, assuming that, the contract didn't specify a time, if Lawrence has been gone for an unreasonably long time, then the moon presence might have a valid action for breach of contract, but then, Lawrence died trying to fulfill the contract. And so, but even then, even in that case, the moon presence could still probably sue Lawrence's estate for breach of contract. Because if the contract didn't necessarily stipulate that death was, a way out, then in real life, death is not necessarily a way out of your contractual obligation.
Well, that raises an interesting point about how the Hunter's Nightmare works. Because if you can die, but then your soul is trapped for eternity in a hellscape.
Yeah.
Can you sue that?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think so, because like in tort and in criminal law, the doctrine of self-defense, you can do things that would otherwise be unlawful to defend yourself from like an ongoing crime or tort, right? But this Hunter's Nightmare is retaliation. That's not, and retaliation is actionable even if you did something wrong to provoke it. So despite the fact that the Hunters did all these gnarly things and killed all these people, the Hunter's Nightmare seems clearly meant to just punish them and retaliate against them. So I think the Hunters might have a cause of action against Koss.
Yes.
Oh, plot twist!
Da-da!
Because Simon specifically says that, like, he has nothing to do with this, but he's still cursed because of what his forefathers did.
Yeah, and that's not even retaliation. Yeah. That's just malice at that point.
Oh, so then Simon can sue Koss?
I think so, yeah. And probably the orphan, too, because the orphan seems to be sort of whatever, like, the moon presence is to the Hunter's dream, the orphan seems to be to the nightmare. To me, Like,
I just looked it up, and someone did attempt to sue God once and won by default because God didn't show up in court.
that makes sense. Yep. Yeah, that's called a default judgment. Yeah, if somebody sues you and you don't show up, then a lot of times what will happen is a judgment of liability will be entered against you, which means for purposes of the case, you're deemed to have done whatever you've been accused of. And then the court will hold a separate hearing to determine how much you have to pay based on it.
Hang on. Here's a really interesting one. A guy in Romania was convicted of murder, and then he filed a lawsuit against God because he had been baptized. And he said if the baptism had worked, he would not have been a murderer.
Oh.
Also, if it had actually purged the devil from him.
Yeah. He said the baptism was a binding contract, and God had failed to keep him from the devil.
I'll bet God didn't show up for that trial either, did he?
Yeah, it says it was dismissed because God's neither an individual nor a company, and therefore not subject to civil court jurisdiction.
That's right. He's not a natural person, or God is a deity, not a natural person or a corporation. Of course, these days there are so many types of entities. We say, among lawyers, we say juridical person, which means basically, an artificial person established as a legal matter, corporation, or a limited liability company, or a limited liability partnership, or get this, a limited liability limited partnership, which is a distinct thing from a limited liability partnership, which is a distinct thing from a limited partnership.
Damn.
Yeah. These are the things we lawyers sit around and come up with.
Oh, okay. Let me ask you. You know how Eileen is the hunter of hunters?
Yep.
Is what she's doing okay?
Hunting people down and killing them who haven't done anything to her? No, not at all.
Well, no. But what happens is, right, if she, at the end of her questline, if you let her murder Henrik, then she becomes blood drunk.
That's right.
Right. So, like, how... But then if she doesn't murder Henrik, she's not blood drunk. So, like, she doesn't seem to be in control when she's blood drunk.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to that distinction between... Like, if she really is blood drunk and her mind's not working right, that may get her off as a matter of criminal law, but...
Yeah.
From the defendant's point of view, though, being found not guilty by reason of insanity is not much better than being convicted. Because once you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, you're probably going to be civilly committed to like a mental institution or something. And they can hold you there for longer than you would have been locked up in prison had you been convicted, because it's however long they deem it necessary for you to have sort of regained your faculties and not be a danger to others. So it's like, let's say you would have been sent to prison for 15 years for assault, but you're found not guilty by reason of insanity. They could keep you locked up for 20 years until they determine that you're sane again.
Oh, wow.
So you may not even be better off to be found not guilty by reason of insanity, because clearly you're dangerous. They're not just going to let you walk around,
But she only attacks mostly blood-drunk hunters, so she's actually doing something good.
Well, here's the thing. If the blood-drunk hunter is in the process of trying to murder somebody, then what she's doing is called defense of others, and it's just like self-defense, except that you're defending somebody else. So you can kill someone who's actively trying to kill someone else, like in the process of it, right? Because that's just like self-defense. But if she's just tracking these people down and killing them, and they're not actively trying to kill someone else at that moment, then it's murder, just like any other murder would.
Ah, I see.
Because like defense is permitted, retaliation is not. It's a fine distinction, but it's a very important one,
So if she knows that a hunter committed a crime, like he was blood drunk at one time and killed someone, she should call the police.
Yeah. Well, in the United States, a private citizen can make an arrest, but you have to be right about it. It's like, if you're a police officer, you can kind of make a reasonable mistake about whether the person has committed a crime or not, or whether a crime was committed and whether that person did it. But if you're just a private citizen, you better be right, or else you're liable for a crime and a tort if you arrest someone and they didn't actually do anything.
Oh, wow.
So most citizens don't arrest others. Because you might meet with resistance, like if this is a really bad person, you might meet with resistance and you might get hurt, you might get killed. But yeah, so a private citizen can use force to lawfully arrest someone who actually has committed a crime on certain. But it's very rarely done for a reason.
Yeah, I saw it in movies where it's like, you're under citizen's arrest or something.
Yeah, and technically that's lawful. And if the person's a dangerous felon trying to flee, then even a private citizen might be able to use deadly force to stop him from getting away, but this is very rare. But it has to be an actively dangerous felon actively fleeing. You know, so that's a very fine distinction. Like if the person reaches a point of safety and gets away, at that point the chase is over, and once the chase is over, the right to use force ends. So, for a private citizen at least, and unless the officer has a warrant, also for a police officer, unless because basically, if there's probable cause to believe the person has committed like a felony or a more serious crime, at least, then the officer can arrest you as long as they know about the information, have reason to believe you did it. But for a private citizen, there's no reasonable belief. There's no ground for a mistake. You have to be right. And that's why most people, I don't think, do citizens arrest, because there's such a risk that you'll be held liable if you're wrong. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Because this is convoluted stuff.
This is the most intelligent podcast we've ever done.
Oh, well, then we're in bad shape then. I'm just kidding. I think they're all... Honestly, I think Richard's so good at explaining the lore. I just love to listen to it.
Well, okay, I thought of another possibly strange situation. Yeah. Okay, Dura.
I was just thinking of Dura.
Yeah, Dura knows that if you die, you'll just come back to life again.
Right.
Because he specifically says, like, you're still going to dream.
Give it some thought, yeah.
So next time you dream, give it some thought. So he is technically killing you, but also he knows you won't actually die.
That's right.
Yeah, so how would that work out?
So at that point, because if he knows you're going to come back, then I don't think it's like homicide or anything like that, because real death has an element of finality to it. And if you know the person is going to come back, then I don't think you're liable for like wrongful death on the civil side or homicide on the criminal side. But that's not to say that you or Dura won't be liable for like assault and battery, like depending on whoever provoked the confrontation. Usually it's us, I guess. Well, no, Dura fired upon you.
Well,
but,
wait, aren't you?
He gives you a warning and then he starts shooting.
Yeah, Richie, aren't you trespassing when you go to Dura's city?
That's right, you are.
Well, is it Dura's city?
It is now.
Because he's just sort of does he legally own Old Yharnam?
Well, I think the tower he's squatting on, if he's been there long enough, at least in American law, there's this doctrine called adverse possession, colloquially called squatter's rights. Whereas even if someone else owns a piece of property, if you just set up shop there and treat it as your own for everybody to see for a certain period of time, usually it's like 15 or 20 years, then the property will become yours, out from under the true owner. And so if Dura's been squatting on that tower for long enough, he could be the owner of the tower, or at least the top part of it.
Yeah, can he be the owner of the entire city?
I don't think that would extend to the whole city. Well, maybe. That part of the city over which he has actually exercised dominion and control for the required period.
Yeah.
So if you could argue that by guarding the city with his Gatling gun, he's exercising control over those parts of the city, then however far his Gatling gun can reach might be the area. And so if he's been doing that for a long enough period of time, then it might be his by adverse possession, as lawyers would say. More common, it's like, if somebody builds a fence and it encroaches like 5 feet on someone else's property 20 years later, the person with the fence owns that 5 feet,
Oh, really?
But that's much less sexy than what we're talking about. But yeah, so I think maybe, of course, the whole city's abandoned, so it's kind of anarchy, but, we won't worry about that. Well, that part of the city, anyway, is abandoned. But yeah. And but you can't use deadly force, though, to defend property. So.
But, well, what if the hunter comes in with, like, a saw cleaver and a gun?
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean you're... It's like...
Well, no, because first Dura is like, please leave, hunter.
Yeah.
But then he still walks forward with his, like, saw cleaver and a gun.
Hey, screw you, Dura. I'm going to run around and kill beasts.
And then he starts to kill beasts. So then Dura is actually, like, doing the self-defense, but for others thing.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, it depends on how you look at the beast patients, right? Like, if you look at them as people, and they're still people, then he's defending others. Yeah. And what he's doing is right. If you look at them as animals, then they're property, and you can't use deadly force to defend property. So,
are animals still property?
Animals are property, and under the law, animals are treated, even though they're alive, they're movable goods, just like computers and widgets. Yeah. Well, like in the United States, there are laws against abusing animals and mistreating them, even though they're technically property. So you're limited, and you can't just do whatever you want to animals. Cruelty to animals. Matter of fact, some cities have police forces, like small police forces, dedicated to prosecuting the animal rights laws. and arresting people for abusing animals. So it's not like animals are, in every sense, just property that you can do whatever you want with, but for most purposes, legally, they're property, not people.
Richie, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Why are you so quiet?
I'm listening to Nick.
Okay.
Also, because you were yelling at me before, I'm like frightened to say anything. Because I'll just be like, what were you saying before? Are you testing me? Well, like, am I considered your property?
Yeah.
Clearly.
Like, not a sentient thing.
Yeah.
I'm movable goods that you get to record podcasts with you, and I have no legal rights.
Yeah, I think so.
Indentured servitude is all right if you're a billion strategist. Or involuntary servitude, I should say. That's not false imprisonment, that's not kidnapping, that's not enslavement or trafficking, that's just the order of the day if you're a brilliant strategist.
Yeah, rules don't apply to sin.
Okay, so I now have like a legitimate weird question about animals as property, right? Rather than sentient things.
Right.
Because as people who, for some reason, like listen to all of these will know, my neighbor's cat has adopted me as her, like, new owner.
Aww.
And will not leave the house, right? So she is, like, I'm not keeping her here, she just runs here from their house. And she, like, hangs around here 23 hours a day and won't leave.
Right.
But, like, am I technically stealing their property when that happens? Because I don't have any control over what she does.
I don't think so, especially if they seem to be acquiescing to it, especially, I don't think so. Like, by they, I mean the owner, the actual owner of the cat.
Yeah, she just won't leave. Like, I used to bring her back, and she just followed me back home again.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
Yeah.
I mean, it's not quite the same as the classic case, because, like, wild animals belong to, like, whoever's property they're on at a given time.
Yeah.
But this is not the cat has an identifiable owner. But if they're acquiescing to the cat coming over and you doing whatever, that's fine, I think.
Yeah.
But if they call you up and say, we don't want the cat coming over there anymore, then that may put some onus on you to kind of make sure the cat gets back over there. But as long as the owner seems to be acquiescing to it, it's fine.
Well, they don't seem to like her very much, so I think...
Oh, yes. so you may be caring for an otherwise neglected animal, which is great.
Oh.
Which is great, That's awesome. I love cats. They're like one of my favorite animals, so that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. Richie is a kind soul.
He is indeed.
Yeah. That's why it's so easy to scream at him and push him around.
Yeah.
Please don't hurt me again.
No, I don't even say that. I'm just like, okay.
Like Eeyore, thanks for noticing me. Okay.
Oh.
Oh, I love it. Well, yeah, so that's the thing with Druid. It depends on whether the beasts are animals or... They were people, clearly. Honestly, I think in real life, if someone like were to transmute into another being, they'd still be considered people for purposes of the legal system. It's like, once you're a person, you're a person.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's say you stumble upon some nuclear waste and you devolve into this gelatinous organism that's still alive. The law will still deem you a person, but you've just been afflicted with a condition that's deprived you of your faculty. But you're still a person.
Oh.
Well, does it work the other way around if you ascend to become a new, like, god species of, like, psychic creature?
Then, technically, I think you'd still be viewed as a person, but at that point, I think you'd be effectively beyond human legal jurisdiction.
This is turning into like an Alan Moore comic or something. Anyway,
the red moon is out, and the boundary between law and philosophy is being blurred.
Okay, here's another question. Right, we kill wrong.
Yep.
Which is what causes the red moon to appear. So everything that happens
is our fault.
After that point in the game is technically our fault.
It is indeed.
But we also didn't know that would happen.
I'm overgeneralizing because I would spend hours explaining this stuff to law students. But basically, in tort or criminal law, you're responsible for what you cause, right?
What about for what you cosm?
Or some say cosm. I love it. And there are two types of causation in the law. There's actual cause and what we call proximate cause. And actual cause is like, your standard physicist or philosopher's conception of causation. If, the result would not have happened but for your actions. That's actual cause, right? your actions somehow contributed to the event taking place, and the event would not have taken place without your act. It gets more complicated than that, but that'll suffice, I think, for this. And what Proximate cause, it sort of looks at how closely connected your action is with the event. Like basically, it boils down to, again, reasonable foreseeability. Like if a reasonable person in your position ought to have foreseen this, then you'll be deemed to have proximately caused it, and you can be held responsible for it. But if no one in your position could have foreseen this or anything like it, then you might not be responsible for it. So I think we're guilty of murder when it comes to Rom, because she's just sitting there chilling, and we come into her house and we kill her for no apparent reason. So I think it's just as if you'd gone into someone's house and murdered them, you know.
No, Nick, but wait, what if the only way to leave causes Arena is to kill her?
Well, one might argue you shouldn't have gone in the first place, except Willem was, because you had no idea though when you went in.
What if you just wanted to? Like, what if you fell? You know, it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah. So the only way to leave, well, at that point, I think you'd still be held responsible for homicide, because it's not Rom's fault either. You know, she didn't do anything. She wasn't trying to attack you. She's just sitting there minding her own business. When you attack her, she acts in self-defense. So I think that you'd still be responsible for homicide, but I think that you'd be shown some leniency because of the circumstances. Like a real life example, and this is maybe the single most interesting legal case that has ever been brought. I think it was an English case, and I think Queen Victoria was reigning at the time. And these guys were out on a ship, right? But they were stranded in the ocean. They were out of food.
Oh no!
And they were starving, right? Yeah. And so eventually, there were three of them, right? They were these three guys. They're at sea. They're stranded at sea. They're out of food. Yeah. They're starving. They're desperate. And so two of the three decide to kill the third guy and eat him to keep from starving.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens. The guy's in his bunk, you know, wishing he had some food. And the other two guys come there, and one guy, it actually happens in the case. One guy ominously says, "It is time," and then they kill him and eat him.
Damn.
And so when they get back, they're prosecuted for homicide, right? And they try to raise the fact that they're desperate and hungry as a defense, like a duress type. But the judge is like, no, you knew what you were doing. You murdered this man. He hadn't done anything to you. So you're responsible for homicide. But then the queen stepped in and commuted their sentence to like 6 months imprisonment because of the circumstances. Because they were desperate and hungry, and they might have actually starved to death if they hadn't killed the guy. So I think something like that would happen. Like you'd be technically convicted of some kind of homicide crime, but you'd be shown some type of leniency because of the circumstances. Like you'd be trapped there for eternity if you didn't kill Rom to get out. You know. So that's what would happen. You'd be in trouble, but not as much trouble.
Interesting.
Yeah. So how did obviously we've talked about like American law versus Canadian law versus English law. How would you figure out what law would govern the Dreamlands?
Well, the only logical way I think to approach it might be that the game originated in Japan, so Japanese law would.
Right.
But apart from that, you know, the whole place seems pretty lawless, and the only government of any kind is the Healing Church. And so I guess Healing Church dictate number X5134 might govern. Or the vicar dictate whatever, because like when Hitler was in power, like his executive orders were called like Führer Directive number 123. So it'd be like vicar directive number 123.
Oh.
Yeah. So, the only logical thing I guess would be Japanese, because Miyazaki's Japanese, so what the heck, And as Miyazaki himself would say, that's one interpretation.
The law would be very open to interpretation.
Exactly.
Okay, I've got a Healing Church law theory, right?
What's up?
Because we know the Healing Church, right? They're called a Healing Church, but if you look at them, they actually behave like a medical institution. They're not actually a church.
Right.
So do you think they are just a medical institution and they call themselves a church for tax reasons?
A medical institution can also be a nonprofit.
I see.
But you see, a religious institution has an advantage, and I used to practice tax, so I know a little something about this. I represented a lot of people who didn't pay the taxes. But anyway, that's another matter. And had no good reason not to pay their taxes. So I tried to broker a deal with the IRS or the state authorities. But anyway, that's a complete tangent. But yeah. If you're a religious institution, you have one advantage over your standard nonprofit, and it's basically if you meet the definition of clergy, and your employer provides housing for you, that's tax-free to you. Like classic example is like pastor of a church gets a parsonage from the church, right, to live in,
Right.
and that's the fair rental value of the parsonage is not deemed taxable income to the minister. And so now any other employer could do something like that, but you have to show a tighter connection between like they're being provided housing because the employer needs them to live on site, And the church doesn't necessarily.
So like, Maria living in the clock.
Yeah, I mean, if you can,
she's got to live on site. Yeah.
Yeah, if like the research hall can show that they need her to live there, then it wouldn't be taxable income to her because she's living there for the employer's sake. But like,
do you think that's the idea behind the Hunter's Dream?
I think that's tax-free to Gehrman because the moon presence needs Gehrman to be there all the time. So I don't think Gehrman has to pay tax on the fair rental value of the Hunter's Dream. Hit whatever little bed he sleeps in the Hunter's Dream.
Does he even have a bed?
I think he sleeps in his chair.
Yeah.
Like he's stuck in that chair until he's ready to kill you, and then he gets up.
Yeah.
Of course, he's trying to kill you for your own benefit, ironically, but that's another one.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up later on. That's a very odd situation.
It is kind of a bizarre situation. But like if you're a religious institution and you're a clergyman, you don't have to show that connection with the employer's needs. The church can just give you a house, and you don't have to show that it's necessary for the church to have you live on site or live in the parsonage. Because many parsonages are off-site, and the preachers will still commute to church, to preach or whatever. So it's like you don't have to show that connection with the employer's needs to get it tax-free. It's just you're clergy, therefore you get the housing tax-free, or whatever institution, a church or a synagogue or mosque or whatever it is decides to provide it for you. Like historically, it was a Christian thing, but it's been expanded. Any minister of any recognized minister of any reasonably established religion can claim the benefit if the religious institution decides to provide the housing. Anyway, that was totally irrelevant to anything, I guess. But that's one advantage. I was going to say that would be one advantage for the Healing Church to present itself as a religious institution, so that the vicar can get tax-free housing. So Vicar Amelia's, sleeping in the Grand Cathedral, and she's not paying tax on the rental. Talking about blood and the frailty of man, or whatever he's talking.
Yeah.
Well, so what is like the minimum you need to do to present yourself as a religious institution?
It's often debated. Like ideally, it'd be like a mainstream, well-established type of religion, but I think it may suffice if there's an institution that appears to believe a set of things in good faith, and they congregate regularly. They've got the finances. They provide their clergy with housing. I think it would probably, even if it's kind of a loosely organized type of thing, as long as there's some semblance of organization and some good faith belief in a set of spiritual ideals, I think it'll suffice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think they could probably get away with that.
Yeah. Because it's not like you're drawing distinctions. Like it works for some religions and not others. You just have to show that it is a religion, and that this is a clergyman or a clergywoman in the religion, and that we're giving her housing. So yeah, it may, because some institutions are more loosely organized than others, but as long as there's some semblance of organization and some good faith spiritual belief, I think it works. As long as it's not a sham, to get free housing or whatever. Yeah. I started a religion so I could get tax-free housing.
Richie, you wanted to ask about Gehrman?
No, we did. We were just talking about, like, the moon presence needs him to live on... Oh, no, okay. The Gehrman question is right. He tries to kill you in a dream.
Yep.
But that is for your own good, because when he kills you, you'll be free from the dream.
Right. And the moon presence won't take you and captivate you, yeah. Yeah,
so, like, how does that work? Because he is assaulting you.
Right.
But it's the only way to free you.
Yeah, I think that to do violence for defense of others, like the other person has to be in like imminent danger of bodily harm. And I'm not sure that applies here strictly. But
the moon presence does rip your leg off.
Yeah, that's true. Then I think that because Gehrman knows that you're just about to be captivated by the moon presence, and you're just about to have your leg ripped off. So it's like, well, you could use force to defend somebody from being kidnapped too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Matter of fact,
yeah, that's what he's doing.
Matter of fact, if it's outright kidnapping, you can use deadly force to defend somebody from kidnapping if you have reason to believe that the kidnapping is imminent. Because kidnapping is what's called an inherently dangerous felony, and for self-defense purposes, those are treated pretty much like an imminent homicide. It's like rape, robbery, arson, kidnapping, and burglary, I think. Yeah, rape, robbery, arson, kidnapping, and burglary are all sort of like classic inherently dangerous felonies, and you can kill someone to prevent one of those crimes from happening, as long as it's in progress or imminent. So yeah, the moon presence is just about to sort of captivate you and rip off your leg, and so if German can show that that's imminent, and that he's attacking you to prevent that, then I think he might have a defense of others defense, and not be held liable in tort or as a matter of criminal law. But now, given the fantasy context, it's kind of a weird showing. That German would have to show how he knows what the moon presence is about to do, and you may have to subpoena the moon presence to testify. And of course, I think Flora is a bit finicky about when she appears, so good luck.
Okay, let's say you did want the moon presence to appear in court.
Yeah.
But, like, the only way to do it was to get the 3/3 chords and summon her under the red moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, how much effort can you actually go to like, subpoena the moon presence?
Well, if the court decides that it's not reasonably practical to summon the moon presence, then they would just make do without her. But if her testimony were absolutely necessary and you couldn't practically summon her, then the case might have to be dismissed.
Because I remember in the 90s in Australia, we had this criminal businessman who ripped off a whole lot of people, and then he disappeared to Mallorca and claimed he couldn't leave for health reasons.
Uh-huh. Well,
and there was I think they deemed like it wasn't absolute. Like, yeah, I'm just thinking maybe it was be something like that.
Like, was he tried in absentia?
I don't know. He eventually died.
Okay. Well, then he got what was coming to him eventually, I guess. He's trapped in the hunter's nightmare now. You know that guy you kill for the blood echoes right before you get to Ludwig? That's him.
Yeah,
that's him, right?
That's him. That's Christopher Skase.
Yep. That's his punishment. Poor guy.
So, do you think maybe there is like there is a court system or whatever in Yharnam, and they're like lawyers and judges and everything, and once you found guilty, you just sent off to the hunter's nightmare, but we just don't see it because it's another part of town where we don't have access to.
Well, it's kind of like what is it, Rikers Island in New York City? Like, you're just sent there, and it's its own isolated place, and then you're forgotten about.
Oh, that brings up a question about the prison they have there.
Ah.
Because, like, those hunters are locked up in that prison, but they're locked up there because presumably they're blood drunk.
Right.
Right. And then you've got Brador locked up in there, and he's there willingly.
Well, if he's there willingly, there's no legal issue as long as he consents to it.
What about, right, Brador is there, and then he invades you as, like, a red spirit.
Right.
So, but the red spirit that invades you is slightly different. It's like a younger version of Brador. And also, he also knows that if he kills you, you will wake up again.
Right.
Right. It's a very complicated situation.
It is. These would make some pretty good law exam hypotheticals. You'd have some bemused law students, but that's okay. That happens all the time. I think that it's not homicide because he knows he's not going to kill you finally and forever. But I think it is pretty clearly assault and battery. Because he's attacking you unprovoked, and there's no reason to believe that he's defending his own property or whatever. He's just there kind of hanging out.
No. What if he's defending the fishing hamlet?
But that's not his prop. Oh, here's a really good question. Okay, say you're Brador and you astrally project somewhere.
Yep.
How long do you have to have astrally projected somewhere before you're granted squatters' rights?
I see. Well,
because your body would be in two different places.
Yep, but you don't necessarily have to be bodily present on the property. You just have to exercise. Well, you have to be present.
Oh, okay.
You have to be present, but not continuously. And I think astral projection would count as physical presence because it's functionally the same.
Yep.
So it's like.
So how we joke about Mikolash is like, oh, you go into his house and this, but you literally go into his house.
You do. And kill him.
Because he was there for a while.
He'd own that nightmare by now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he's been there, by all indications, he's been there long enough for his body to wither and decay.
Yeah.
So I think at least over that area within the little temple where you go to fight him, or the castle or whatever. He probably would have squatters' rights. Maybe not over the outskirts where he doesn't exercise any control, unless he does. It's kind of murky, but yeah, over that where anywhere you see a marionette, I think he might have squatters' rights. Yeah.
So, in the most literal sense, we're trespassing on someone's property and killing them.
You are, yeah.
Yeah.
And
oh my god!
By all indications, you have no idea, really, not much of a clue that he's trying to, spec and cause, and as a consequence of which he'll kind of wipe everybody out with the red moon.
And he doesn't even attack us; he just runs away from us.
Yeah, he literally
only attacks
runs
us
away.
when we corner him.
Yeah.
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 But here's the thing, though. At least in Tort, and maybe in criminal law, well, there's a doctrine called public necessity. It's like, if you know that if you don't kill this fool, he's going to turn everyone into a beast and everyone's going to die, then you might have justification to kill him because you're preventing a public disaster from taking place. But that's if you know. And the lore is pretty inscrutable. At least the first time you play through, you're like, what the heck is going on? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So maybe if you know that there's this disaster coming, if you don't kill this guy, you might be justified. But otherwise, yeah, you're trespassing and killing somebody.
But wait, but even in lore terms, if we don't kill Mikolash, what happens? Nothing happens.
No, exactly. Because the red moon's already happened.
Yeah.
By that
he
point.
has nothing to do with it. He's in his nightmare being happy in his castle. But he did kidnap a baby, though.
See, yeah, you can... Yeah. You might, if you're trying to rescue someone from kidnapping, then, I don't know, it's... Private citizens...
Well, the thing is, we kind of don't know that's happened.
Right.
Until... I guess if you, were paying really close attention, you might realize that he's got Mergo, but... I think most people probably didn't realize what was going on until the very end.
Yeah.
So I guess, can you claim that it was okay if you figured out, retroactively you were doing the right thing?
I don't think so. No, you have to know what's happening at the time you do it.
Oh, really?
At the time you do it, you have to know that, let's say classic self-defense, you have to know that someone's either attacking you or someone else, and it's ongoing at the moment. Because you're judged based on what you reasonably perceived at the time. It's not evaluated in hindsight, So I think we're in trouble. It seems because killing Mikolash doesn't get rid of the red moon. Freeing Mergo doesn't get rid of the red moon. It would, at least in terms of the gameplay.
Okay, but let's say I kill Mikolash, and then I proceed in the game, and I kill the wet nurse and everything, and then I realize, eventually, oh my god, Mikolash kidnapped this baby. So what I was doing may be considered what if I lie? What if I'm I knew it all along. That's why I went there, to save Mergo.
Do you think that's what a lot of this lore discussion really is? It's just us pretending we knew all along why we did things.
Really, we had no idea. It's the hunter's just in a daze the whole time, going from one inexplicable event to the next, and really not knowing what's going on. Yeah. I think the fourth Hellraiser movie is a lot like that. The main character is just. It's just at the end you find out the main character has died and gone to hell, but before that it's he's going from one inexplicable event to the next, trying to figure things out, and the audience is kind of carried along with him. And if you've seen the previous,
is that a common legal thing, the Hellraiser 4 defense?
It should. It's I had no idea what was happening. I was just carried along as if someone were writing a story for me. But we'd have to rely on the Hellraiser 4 defense, and as far as I know, that's never worked. Sleepwalking defense has worked.
Well, hang on a minute, because there's one of the theories that people had about Yharnam is the whole game a dream?
Right.
So could you claim that you were technically sleepwalking through the entire event of the narrative, everything that happened?
Well, in real life, the sleepwalking defense has succeeded for people. It's
right.
You have kind of a high bar of skepticism to overcome, but basically, to be held responsible criminally or in tort, you have to commit an act, and an act is a voluntary bodily movement, right? Or an omission if you're under a legal duty to act. But that's nuances for law students. We don't need to get into that here. So if it's not if it's not a conscious bodily movement, you can't be held responsible for it, right? So sleepwalking is not a conscious bodily movement. Your body's autonomous, effectively, at that point. So, people have killed others in their sleep and successfully argued that, hey, I was sleepwalking. I'm sorry, can't be held responsible. And they got, in terms of criminal liability, they got off. I mean, in real life, this has happened. So, I don't know. That wouldn't be my first resort for a defense, but if it was all I had, I'd make the best case I could. And some lawyers have been able to do it. And professionally, I admire that, even if you're a bit skeptical about whether it's actually true.
Huh.
But yeah, so it might work if you could establish that, you were sort of in this sleepwalking haze the whole time and weren't really in control, then yeah, it might work.
Well, Gurman does say you're sure to be in a fine haze about that.
He does.
Yeah.
But try not to think too hard about it. Just go kill a few beasts. It's for your own good.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, it is. Because that's how you get stronger, but whatever. Yeah.
Oh, you know how we were talking about property?
Yeah.
Versus, I guess, sentient beings or whatever?
Mhm.
Or versus humans? The doll, which would she fall under?
See, it's a good question. Because she has the human legal system hasn't really encountered anything like this yet. But if it were to...
Yes.
Yes.
What you would have, I think, is that you have one doll who's sentient. I think at first she wouldn't really have any rights because no one has decided that sentient dolls have rights, and so there's been no provision made in the legal system for it. But you have one doll who is sentient. She wouldn't technically have any rights, but then you'd have more dolls, and then they would band together and march and protest for civil rights, and eventually they would be granted.
What about the Winter Lanterns?
We should just kill those and not worry about them anymore. I mean, I hate the Winter Lanterns with
Okay, here's another question, right?
Yeah.
Winter Lanterns and the Mensis Brain, they kill everything around them just by, proxy.
Yeah.
So are they responsible if you just die of frenzy from being around one?
Well, it looks like they can kind of control it, though, right? I don't.
It kind of can.
Yeah. And so, if they can control it, then I think they're responsible because that.
Yeah.
But let's say they can't.
Well, if they can't, then in terms of criminal liability, if they get conscious bodily movement, meaning a bodily movement you can control, I don't know that they'd be directly responsible. But here's the thing: it's like, let's say you're prone to seizures and you know it. You shouldn't drive a car because you know at any point you could go unconscious and hurt someone, right? So if you know you're prone to seizures and you get out and drive anyway, and you have a seizure and wreck and kill someone, you're responsible because you knew that might happen.
Uh-huh.
So the Winter Lanterns are running around knowing that at any point they can frenzy and kill someone, so they have kind of a responsibility to take measures to prevent that. Sequester themselves.
Okay.
But
what if they don't know?
Well, if they somehow don't know, then I don't suppose they could be held responsible for it. But it seems pretty clear that you have all these corpses with all these frenzy spears in them.
What if they're like Yorshka? They don't understand life.
Oh, they're just stupid. Art thou a bird or some winged thing? And you say yes. Oh, I thought so.
That is a perfect Yorshka impression.
Oh, yeah. To paraphrase, she's like, oh, how'd you get up here? The bridge to the tower has been long abandoned. Art thou a bird or some winged thing? And I always say yes, just because it's amusing. If you say no, she'll confess to being kind of stupid. But if you say yes, she'll be like, oh, to paraphrase, oh, I thought so. That's pretty cool. Because I can't remember her exact dialogue, but it's something like that. I'm like, wow, you're the head of the Blades of the Dark Moon? At least Gwendolyn was not an idiot.
Okay, because we've crossed over into Dark Souls 3, right?
Yeah.
Could, Pontiff Sullivan, right, was supposed to be the villain, ended up being a mid-boss who's not really explained. Could he sue From Software?
Well, see, here's the thing. Maybe. I'm always careful about saying who can sue, because anybody can sue anybody for anything. Yeah. Whether it'll succeed is another matter. Now, that's not anything on you. It's just, if I were talking to law students, when I teach people legal writing, I harp on that because it, whatever. But yeah, I think what you meant was, could they successfully sue? And I think maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if From Software set the expectation that Pontiff Sullivan would be like the main antagonist, and he entered into the transaction with that reasonable expectation, and then they all of a sudden demoted him to this mid-game boss / like you said, Machiavellian genius who's responsible for everything. I think he might be able to sue, for breach of contract or something akin to it. and prevail. From if he entered the arrangement, decided to be in the game with the reasonable expectation of being, final boss, the main boss. So yeah, I think maybe Miyazaki better hire himself a lawyer somewhere in Lothric and get ready for a lawsuit because you've been demoted to mid-level boss.
Okay, so we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, and I think we can wrap it up for now. And if people found this interesting, we can have another one.
Do you think Patreon supporters could sue you for the continued deteroration of this show?
Well, I think she makes the expectations clear, right? You get nothing, and you might get banned from Discord.
Yeah, there we go. It's very clear that you're getting shit content from Patreon. Content no one should ever see.
Sin talking to a bunny.
Yeah, and it's all labeled. Like every YouTube video, there's a name and a duration. Like Richie talking like a cat for 2 minutes.
Well, I'm glad to know that Nick has now told me that feral cat is my property because it lives under a tree in the garden.
Well, at the very least, you're not doing anything wrong by I think it still belongs to the owner, but as long as they acquiesce.
Oh no, that's another one.
This is a different cat.
Yeah. Oh,
Richie has many cats.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's one cat that belongs to the people next door
Right.
that has adopted me and won't leave, and then there's one that's just a feral.
Oh, if it's a wildcat, then as long as it's on your property, yeah, it's yours.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It's legally my cat now. Okay.
Yeah. And then if you take it in and as your pet and effectively adopt it, then there's an argument to be made that it's not wild anymore and it's yours wherever it might go until someone else,
Aw.
effectively exercises squatters' rights over the cat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap it up. And like I said, if people like this or they have more questions for Nick in terms of the Soulsborne universe, we could have another one.
I can't imagine anyone asking about the legal implications of all this stuff, but I'm happy to be on standby to answer if anyone does.
Okay. So yeah, Nick, thank you so much for coming.
Anytime. It was a blast, as always.
Aw. Are you going to send us a bill for this consultation later on?
The first consultation, so.
Okay, good. Yeah, and you also have a YouTube channel as well as a Twitter.
Oh, yes, that's right. Both under the name Cinder Thief, CYNDR space Thief.
You have a lot of really cool streams and PvP content and boss fighting content and things like that.
HUDless boss fights.
HUDless boss fights, those are impressive.
Yeah, some are HUDless, some aren't, but I've recently made a playlist for all the HUDless stuff so it's easier to find, because apparently people like that. So.
Yeah, no, it's really cool.
The reason I started making HUDless videos was just so that you could use them, for videos.
Yeah, Richie, did I tell you? Because Nick was like, oh, I record, so Sin, is there something you need? I could record it for you.
Yeah, you did tell me, yeah.
Yeah, but at first it was like, when Nick asked me, I think at first I was like, oh yeah, cool, that would be great. Then it's like, oh, could you not twitch around with the camera and make it smooth? Oh, also, could you not have a HUD when you do that? Oh, also.
Well, it looks more cinematic without the HUD, I guess, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that's that's why, before when I was emptying the recycling bin, it's because I just did a complete HUDless, playthrough.
Oh, man.
It's all in HD, so it's
oh my God.
There's a lot of space taken up by that thing.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh, why did you do that, Richie?
Because I am putting together different videos, and I wanted everything to look consistent, so I'm not zooming in on 480p footage from 3 years ago anymore.
Oh, does it mean we might see a video from you soon?
Oh, no.